At over 1,000,000 square kilometres larger than the Roman Empire would ever be, the Persian Achaemenid kingdom was one of the greatest in history. At its peak, almost half of the world's population lived in it, a staggering proportion considering it only made up around 5% of the world's landmass. It extended from Thrace, Macedon and Libya in the west, to Bactria, China and India in the east, from modern-day Russia in the north to Sudan and Nubia in the south. In the mid-540s BCE, Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great of Persia, led a campaign through Asia Minor in modern-day Turkey. He captured Ionia, Lydia, Lycia and Mysia, and made his western power base at the Lydian capital of Sardis. He let the conquered states govern themselves, but the people placed in charge were native tyrants, appointed by the local Persian satrap or provincial governor, called Artaphernes. At the very beginning of the 5th century BCE, Ionians became angry with the choice of governor, and they began a rebellion in Ephesus. Similar rebellions began in Elis, Doria, Cyprus and Caria. Help from mainland Greece came to the Ionians' assistance. In the spring of 498 BCE, an Athenian force of 20 triremes, accompanied by 5 from Eretria, joined up with the Ionian forces near Ephesus. This force was then guided by the Ephesians through the mountains to Sardis, Artaphernes' satrapal capital. The Greeks caught the Persians by surprise and captured the whole lower city. However, Artaphernes still held the citadel with a large military force. According to Herodotus, the lower city then caught on fire, forcing the Persians in the citadel out into the marketplace, where they fought with the Greeks and forced them to retreat to Ephesus. Darius was outraged when he heard of the burning of Sardis, and he swore to take revenge upon the Athenians. Herodotus even reports that he instructed a servant to remind him 3 times each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." His first attempt at revenge came in the form of the First Persian War, begun in 492 BCE. The invasion, consisting of 2 campaigns, was designed to punish both Athens and Eretria for their roles in the destruction of Sardis. The first campaign, in 492 BCE, led by Mardonius, extended the Persian Empire through Thrace to the north of the Aegean. Macedon, to the north of Greece, was also forced into becoming a vassal state. The first campaign ended abruptly, however, when Mardonius' fleet was wrecked in a storm near Thassos. The following year, Darius sent ambassadors to the city-states of Greece, demanding their submission. He received it from all of them, except Athens and Sparta, who both executed the ambassadors. Darius then ordered another campaign to take place in 490 BCE. The second campaign was led by the satrap Artaphernes himself. They travelled across the Aegean, island hopping and annexing many islands into the Achaemenid Empire. They then reached Greece and landed at Eretria on Euboea, which was razed to the ground, and its population was enslaved. The fleet then headed for Attica across the Euripus Strait. They landed at Marathon and were decisively defeated by the Athenians. Although Darius did not get to punish Athens, he had destroyed Eretria and put much of the Aegean under his control. He would die before he could attack Athens and Sparta again. After Darius' death in 486 BCE, aged around 64, his son Xerxes I came to the throne. He spent several years planning for the second invasion of Greece to complete his father's quest to enact revenge on Athens. He mustered an enormous army and navy, the largest ever assembled at the time. Herodotus claims that there were 5,283,220 military and support personnel overall, although modern historians dispute whether the rivers of Thrace would have held enough water to keep them alive. Perhaps 100,000 to 500,000 troops is a more accurate number. According to Herodotus, and much less disputed, the Persian fleet numbered 1,207 triremes and 3,000 transport and supply ships. The Athenians and Spartans led the Greek resistance, with some 70 city-states joining the Allied effort. However, most of the Greek cities remained neutral or submitted to Xerxes. Macedon to the north was already a puppet state of the Achaemenid Empire. Xerxes' army crossed over the Hellespont into Europe in April 480 BCE. It began its march to Greece through Thrace. 5 major food depots had been set up along the path, with the last in Therma, or modern-day Thessaloniki. There, food had been sent from Asia for 3 years in preparation for the campaign. The Persian army took roughly 3 months to travel the distance from Hellespont to Therma. The Allies met in the spring of 480 BCE. A Thessalian delegate suggested that the Allies could block the Vale of Tempe on the borders of Thessaly, and thereby block Xerxes' advance. The Spartan Unitus and Themistocles led 10,000 soldiers there, but Alexander I of Macedon explained how the pass could be bypassed. They then retreated to Thessaly again. A second strategy was therefore suggested to the Allies by Themistocles. The route to Boeotia, Phocis, Attica and the Peloponnese would require the army of Xerxes to march through the very narrow pass of Thermopylae, bordered on one side by the sea and on the other by huge cliffs. This could easily be blocked by the Allies, despite the overwhelming number of Persians. Themistocles also suggested that the Athenian navy should block the Strait of Artemisium to the northwest of Euboea. This dual strategy was adopted by the Congress, but the Peloponnesian city-states also made plans to defend the Isthmus of Corinth should Xerxes reach Boeotia and Attica, whilst the women and children of Athens were evacuated to the Peloponnesian city of Troezen. When the Allies received news that Xerxes was clearing paths around Mount Olympus, and thus intending to march towards Thermopylae, it was during the truce of the Olympic Games and the Spartan festival of Carnea. Combat during this time was considered sacrilegious, and many city-states were unwilling to dispatch troops immediately. The Spartans, however, considered the threat so grave that they felt action was required. Earlier that year, the Spartan king Leonidas I had consulted the oracle at Delphi, who said, "O ye men who dwell in the streets of broad Lacedaemon, either your glorious town shall be sacked by the children of Perseus, or, in exchange, must all through the whole Laconian country mourn for the loss of a king, descendant of great Heracles." Leonidas, claiming descendancy from Heracles, was convinced that he would give his life to save Sparta. Because of this, even though war was against Spartan law, he proceeded to lead his personal bodyguard of 300 men, the Hippeis, to Thermopylae. Leonidas, knowing they would die, selected only men with living sons to form the Hippeis, so the Spartan bloodline would continue. On the way, he picked up between 6,000 and 8,000 other troops from many different city-states. After passing through nearby Locrian and Phocia, the Allies proceeded to occupy the pass, and rebuilt the wall the Phocians had constructed at the narrowest point. They waited for Xerxes' arrival. Leonidas knew of a mountain pass which could have been used to outflank him, and because of this he stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers at the top. When the Persians arrived at Thermopylae in mid-August, they initially waited for 3 days for the allies to disperse. Eventually, when it was clear the Greeks would not leave, Xerxes began to plan an attack. He wanted to outflank Leonidas, and a naval attack was the easiest way. Because of this, an allied naval force of 271 triremes, led by Themistocles, defended the Straits of Artemisium against the Persians' 800. The Persians sent 200 ships around Euboea to outflank the Greek forces. The Greeks had chosen their battlefield very well. From a strategic point of view, by defending Thermopylae, the Greeks were making the best possible use of their forces. As long as they could prevent further Persian advance into Greece, they had no requirement to seek a decisive victory, and they could therefore remain on the defensive. Moreover, by defending 2 constricted passages at both Thermopylae and Artemisium, the Greeks' much smaller numbers became less problematic. For the Persians, the problem of supplying such a large army meant that they could not remain in the same place for too long, for fear of exhausting food and water supplies. Tactically, the pass at Thermopylae was ideally suited to the Greek style of warfare. A hoplite phalanx would be able to block the narrow pass with ease, with no risk of being outflanked by the strong Persian cavalry. The Persians' main attack force was made up of light infantry, which would find attacking the heavy hoplite armour hard. The major weak point for the Greeks was the mountain track which led across the highland parallel to Thermopylae, and which would allow their position to be outflanked. Leonidas hoped that the Phocians would stop any outflanking manoeuvre. The pass of Thermopylae was still an important defensive position in the Second World War, when the Allied forces used it to defend against the Nazi invasion. On the 5th day after the Persian arrival at Thermopylae, Xerxes finally resolved to attack. First of all, he ordered 5,000 archers to fire a barrage of arrows at the Greeks, but the bronze shields and helmets deflected the missiles, leaving no permanent damage. The missiles were fired from at least 100 yards away, and Persian bows were made of weaker wood than normal. After that, Xerxes sent a force of 10,000 light infantrymen against the Greeks, to take them prisoner and bring them before him. The Persians soon found themselves launching a frontal assault in waves of around 10,000 men on the Greek position. The Greeks fought in front of the Phocian wall at the narrowest part of the pass, which was only 100 metres wide. Herodotus says that units were rotated in and out of the battle to prevent fatigue, which implies the Greeks had more men than necessary to block it. The Greeks killed so many attacking soldiers that Xerxes is said to have stood up 3 times off the seat from which he was watching the battle. According to the Greek historian Ctesias, the first wave was cut to ribbons with a death toll of near 10,000 Persians and around 2 or 3 Spartans. Meanwhile, at Artemisium, Themistocles was holding off the Persian navy. They sustained many more losses, mainly due to Themistocles' superior tactics. Back at Thermopylae, Xerxes then sent the Immortals forward, an elite corps of 10,000 men. They fared no better than the light infantry, and eventually night fell, causing an end to battle. Overnight, the 200 Persian ships trying to outflank the Athenian navy were hit by a storm, and most were sunk on the rocks of Euboea. On the second day, Xerxes again sent in the infantry to attack the pass, but this third wave again made no progress. Little happened at Artemisium today. The Persians did not attack following their heavy losses the day before, and the Greeks were holding a defensive position. Later in the day, Xerxes received information that would change the course of the battle from a man named Ephialtes from the nearby town of Trachis. It is supposed that Ephialtes' parents had fled Sparta at his birth because of his deformities. It was routine for Spartans to kill deformed babies. Hoping for some kind of revenge on Leonidas or a reward from the Persians, he informed Xerxes of the mountain pass around Thermopylae and offered to guide the Persian army. For this act, Ephialtes came to mean nightmare in the Greek language, and he became the archetypal traitor in Greek culture. Troops were immediately sent to encircle the Greeks. At daybreak on the third day, the Phocians guarding the pass above Thermopylae became aware of the outflanking Persian column. They were shocked and assumed that their homeland was being attacked. They moved down the road towards Phocis. Unfortunately, this was the opposite direction to the main Greek force, and the Persians continued through the pass unopposed. Learning that the Phocians had not held the path, Leonidas called a council of war. The decision was taken by many of the Greek contingents to withdraw and to fall back to defensive positions around their home cities or on the Isthmus of Corinth. A small contingent of 700 Thespians, led by their general Demophilus, refused to leave with the other Greeks, but committed themselves to the fight. 400 Thebians also remained, leaving a force of just 1,500 to guard the pass from two sides. Soon after, a Persian force of 10,000 men, consisting of light infantry and cavalry, charged at the front of the Greek formation. The Greeks moved forward into the wider part of the pass, eventually breaking phalanx and fighting with spears until every spear was shattered. They then used their swords. Meanwhile, at Artemisium, the Persians launched a full frontal assault, trying to encapsulate the Greeks in a semicircle. This was partially successful, and losses were roughly equal. The smaller Greek force could not afford to lose as many ships as the Persians, though Themistocles considered a tactical retreat. Eventually, Leonidas himself was shot down by Persian archers. A huge fight began over his body, the Greeks taking possession. The remaining soldiers retreated to a hill behind the Phocian wall. Tearing down part of the wall, Xerxes had the hill surrounded. The Persians rained down arrows until every last Greek was dead. The pass at Thermopylae was finally opened to the Persian army, but at a cost of over 20,000 men, compared to at most 2,000 Greek casualties. While Leonidas had been killed and the Persians had broken through, perhaps as much as 20% of the Persian army had been killed, and the allies had time to secure the Isthmus of Corinth. Themistocles, hearing of this, ordered the men on his ships to slaughter and barbecue the flocks of the Euboeans, so they would not fall into Persian hands. Then, with no reason to continue guarding the Strait of Artemisium, he moved his navy back towards Athens due to their heavy losses. No one really knows why Leonidas dismissed the troops like he did. It is commonly stated that the Spartans were obeying the laws of Sparta by not retreating, but this notion actually came from the events of Thermopylae. In reality, the Spartans would retreat whenever it was strategically advantageous to do so. It is also possible that, recalling the words of the oracle, Leonidas wanted to sacrifice his life in order to save Sparta. The most likely theory, however, is that Leonidas chose to hold up the Persian army so that the other Greek contingents could get away. If all the troops had retreated, then they would have been annihilated by the Persian cavalry in the open plain south of Thermopylae. If they had all remained at the pass, they would have been circled and killed. By continuing to block the pass, Leonidas could save more than 3,000 men who would be able to guard the Isthmus of Corinth and ultimately Sparta. And that is the story of Thermopylae. The Greeks were defeated today. The Persians took all of northern Greece and Attica and razed Athens to the ground. Darius' mission of vengeance was finally complete. But in giving his life, Leonidas bought the other Greeks several days of valuable time. They managed to retreat and build up another army. The war would almost certainly have been over in a matter of months if the Spartans had retreated too. Just before the sacking of the Acropolis by Xerxes, the Athenian people had been evacuated to the island of Salamis, just south of Attica. Here, Themistocles had retreated with his fleet of just under 400 triremes. The Persians had between 600 and 1,200, depending on which source you believe is most accurate. Although heavily outnumbered, the Greek allies were persuaded to bring the Persian fleet to battle again, in the hope that a victory would prevent naval operations against the Peloponnese. Xerxes was also anxious for a decisive battle. Themistocles eventually managed to trick Xerxes' navy into entering the thin Strait of Salamis, where their larger numbers became a hindrance as ships had trouble moving past each other. Nevertheless, Xerxes surrounded the strait on both sides. The actual details of the battle are not known to us. Most of the Athenians were cowering in terror on Salamis, and those that were fighting would not have had a good view of the battle. What we do know is that there was utter carnage. The ships were not particularly suited to close combat in the closed waters of the strait. They were designed to be used as massive rams and could not perform ranged attacks. There was not enough room for them to pick up speed, and according to Herodotus, several Persian ships sank each other. Artemisia, the queen of Halicarnassus, found herself pursued by a Greek ship. In her desire to escape, she attacked and rammed another Persian vessel, thereby convincing the Athenian captain that the ship was an ally, and the chase ended. However, Xerxes, looking on, thought that she had successfully attacked an allied ship, and seeing the poor performance of his other captains, commended her. Soon the outcome became clear. The Persian ships were no match for Themistocles' strategic genius, and were annihilated. Xerxes then attempted to build another pontoon bridge across to the island, but this proved futile due to the Greek naval superiority. Eventually, concerned that the Greeks would sail to the Hellespont and burn down the pontoon bridge, stranding his army in Europe, he returned. A 2-year detour around the Black Sea would leave most of his army dead. Xerxes left the general Mardonius in Greece with a small force. He intended for him to complete the invasion the following year. The next year, the Greeks sent a massive army out of the Peloponnese, roughly equal to the Persian force. They caught up with them near Plataea and defeated them easily. Well over half of the Persians were massacred, yet only several thousand Greeks were killed. At the same time, the Greek navy pursued the remnants of the Persian navy to Ionia, and destroyed them in the Battle of Mycale. The final Persian War was over, and yet again the Greeks had won. Perhaps the war could have been won at Thermopylae. If Carnea hadn't been ongoing, maybe Sparta would have sent their full army of tens of thousands of men. While their 300 soldiers held off the Persians, maybe a stronger force could have finished them off. Simonides' epitaph to the dead of Thermopylae highlighted the cause of Leonidas' death. It reads as follows: Og sein angelain Lacedaemonoios, hoti teda caempha tois canon remasi pathomenoi. This translates famously to, "Go tell the Spartans passer-by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." It is a troubling thought to consider what would have happened if the Greeks had lost. Democracy was just beginning to form in Athens at the time. It is very unlikely that it would have been created anywhere else for several millennia. If the Persians had taken the Peloponnese, then the world today would have been a very different place. Persia was a dictatorship. But Themistocles' Athens was, without a doubt, the birthplace of modern Western civilization. We should remember the sacrifice that those Spartans and Thespians made 2,500 years ago, for, without knowing it, those 1,000 men were fighting for thousands of millions of us today. Without their sacrifice, we would live in a very different place indeed.